All right, let's get right into it. We're looking at a huge environmental and political battle that's unfolding right now, and it's centered on one of America's most treasured wilderness areas. But this is about so much more than just a single mine. It's about history, science, economics, and really the future of our public lands. In this quote right here, this is where it all starts. When the direct descendants of Teddy Roosevelt, the man who basically created modern conservation, feel they have to co-sign a letter for the very first time, well, you know something big is going down. It immediately tells you just how high the stakes are here.
And here's the urgency. A vote is happening in the U.S. Senate that could completely wipe out a major environmental protection, a 20-year mining ban. So this isn't some abstract debate about the future. This is happening right now.
So, to really get what this fight is all about, you first have to understand the place. What exactly is the Boundary Waters, and why does it inspire such fierce protection? First off, just think about the sheer scale of this place. We're not talking about a small park. This is over 1 million acres of pristine forests, glacial lakes, and streams. It's this massive, interconnected ecosystem that stretches for 150 miles right along the Canadian border. And this isn't just some empty patch of land either. It's actually the most visited wilderness area in the entire United States. We're talking about 250,000 people coming here every year. And all that tourism, it supports a really important local recreation economy, pumping over $17 million into the area annually.
You know, this isn't some new fight. People have been working to protect this area for over 100 years, starting with Theodore Roosevelt himself. You can see there's this long, bipartisan history of conservation, with protections getting stronger and stronger over the decades. And it all led to that 20-year mining ban that was just put in place in 2023 after a really in-depth scientific review.
So what could possibly threaten a century-long legacy like that? Well, the whole conflict comes down to a very specific type of mining. It's something that's never been done in Minnesota before, and it carries some really unique environmental risks, especially for a place that's so defined by its water.
So, that's the big question, right? What exactly is copper sulfide mining, and why is it so incredibly controversial in this specific spot?
Okay, let's break it down. It starts with blasting rock underground to get to the ore. Now here's the problem. Less than 1% of all that rock actually has the valuable metal in it. That means you're left with 99% waste rock, and that waste is full of sulfide minerals. When that stuff gets exposed to air and water, a chemical reaction happens and it creates sulfuric acid. And that acid is nasty. It leaches toxic heavy metals right out of the rock, which can then drain into that pristine water system.
And this right here is the heart of the disagreement. On one side, you have the mining company, Twin Metals. They argue that their modern mine design can totally prevent this acid drainage from happening. On the other side, conservationists are, let's just say, skeptical. They're pushing for something called a prove-it-first law, basically saying, show us one example, just one, where this type of mine is operated safely without causing pollution in a similar environment.
But this fight has moved beyond the science lab and the wilderness. It's now in Washington, D.C., where opponents of the ban are trying to use a little-known but very powerful political tool to just get rid of it.
And that tool is called the Congressional Review Act, or the CRA. It was passed back in '96, and it gives Congress a kind of fast-track way to kill new regulations coming from federal agencies. The really important thing here is that it can't be filibustered in the Senate, so all you need is a simple majority to get it passed.
But here's where it gets really controversial. The CRA was designed to overturn new rules within a 60-day window, but this new effort, it's trying to use it on a 3-year-old public land order, and that's a type of federal action that has never, ever been considered a rule under this law before. So this is a pretty dramatic expansion of how this law is being used.
And that brings us to the bigger picture, because this vote isn't just about Minnesota. If this move is successful, it could set a really powerful and some would say dangerous precedent for protected public lands all across the country. And we come right back to the Roosevelt family for this crucial point. They are warning that if Congress can use this new interpretation of the CRA to retroactively cancel a land protection order from years ago, then really no public land designation anywhere in the U.S. is truly safe from future political winds.
So, to quickly sum up the case being made by opponents, they point out that the mine is foreign-owned, that it threatens an existing American recreation economy, that it ignores the science that led to the ban in the first place, that it sets a really risky national precedent, and, at the end of the day, that it goes against a century-long American conservation legacy.
Now let's look at the key politicians framing this debate.
On the pro-mining side, you have Representative Pete Stauber, who calls the ban an attack on our way of life. That really speaks to the region's mining history and the promise of good-paying jobs. On the anti-mining side, Senator Tina Smith frames it as a foreign company that will dig up the copper, leave us with the mess, focusing on the environmental risk. And finally, you have Secretary Deb Haaland, who actually issued the ban, and she points to both the science and the U.S. government's treaty responsibilities to tribal nations.
So what does this all boil down to? Well, the math is actually pretty simple. Because of that special CRA procedure, it will take just 4 Republican senators to vote with the Democrats to keep the mining ban in place and stop this whole thing in its tracks.
And that leaves us with this final, really important question. This entire conflict is a perfect example of a very modern dilemma. It forces all of us to ask, when you have a historic legacy of conservation on one hand and the push for economic growth and resources on the other, where and how do you draw the line?